Good evening and welcome to APTN National News. I'm Rick Harp. We begin tonight in Saskatchewan, where 3 years ago, a young man shot 4 people to death and injured 7 others in the small village of Loche. That shooter, who we cannot name, was back in court today, where his lawyer argued his client should not be sentenced as an adult. Here with more on why is APTN's Priscilla Wolf.
The shooter was only 2 weeks away from turning 18 when he shot and killed 2 brothers in their home, and then went to the Loche High School and shot and killed a teacher and a teacher's aide. He pled guilty to first-degree murder, second-degree murder, and attempted murder. He was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 10 years. His lawyer argues that he should have been sentenced as a youth that has a maximum of 6 years in custody and 4 years under supervision. His lawyer also says that the shooter was a lost soul who slipped through the cracks, and that he suffers from many mental health disorders as well as fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. The shooter is at the Saskatchewan Court of Appeal in Regina, asking to be sentenced as a youth or for a new hearing. His name still cannot be released until the appeal is settled. Back to you in Winnipeg.
To Ottawa now, where Bill C-92, said to offer Indigenous communities greater control over their child welfare systems, is currently before the Senate Standing Committee on Aboriginal Peoples. And this week, senators studying the bill heard an impassioned plea to always keep in mind the best interests of the child.
If we don't acknowledge and keep children connected to their culture, the impact of the child welfare system isn't protection. In fact, if we can't keep kids protected, we're going to see them later in the criminal justice system. The levels of kids who come through disconnected and then have their own children taken is high. The price is too high to not acknowledge that we need to define best interests according to the laws of the nation and to include connection to that nation.
Meanwhile, proceedings in the House of Commons were brought to a brief halt today after an MP passed out in her seat. Yet, as you'll see, Liberal MP Pam Damoff's fainting spell was not immediately apparent to all her colleagues.
In the G7 that has a free trade agreement with all G7 countries. Our government, under our Prime Minister and the Minister of International Trade, as diversifying trade, investing in Canadian businesses, making sure that we're creating wealth.
We need assistance for a member. Medical assistance.
Fortunately, there was a doctor in the House of Commons, 2 of them in fact, former Liberal Jane Philpott, seen here in the top right of your screen, as well as Dr. Carolyn Bennett, seen on the bottom left. Now, Damoff would regain consciousness. The Prime Minister's office says she's all right. Now, speaking of Jane Philpott, the Speaker of the House ruled today that the MP's parliamentary privileges were not violated when both she and Jody Wilson-Raybould were recently kicked out of the Liberal caucus in what was widely seen as just the latest chapter in the whole SNC-Lavalin scandal.
To conclude that the member for Markham-Stouffville has been obstructed in the fulfillment of her parliamentary functions. Accordingly, I cannot find that there is a prima facie question of privilege. I thank all honourable members for their attention.
Philpott had claimed the Prime Minister failed to follow changes to the Parliament of Canada Act made in 2015, changes that required each party caucus to have recorded votes on whether to adopt rules about how members could be removed. But the Liberals never held such a vote. To the north we go, where modern medicine is finally catching up to what Indigenous healers have known for centuries. And in this next story from APTN's Charlotte Morat Jacobs, we'll meet an author who works to tie traditional knowledge together with the latest science.
Dr. Nicole Redvers is using her Indigenous knowledge to inform medical science. She is a naturopathic physician, an academic, and a member of Denenekwe First Nation. She has seen Indigenous medicine disregarded as unscientific,
There's a lot of misconceptions that Indigenous traditional systems are quackery, are unscientific, are unevidence-based, and we have a movement right now in many Western areas of the world where we can clearly see the power dynamic in medicine and who's fielding the conversation, because it creates a story, right? And I think what a lot of those people don't realize is that by doing that, they're minimizing the knowledge and the experience of our elders that still live today and listen to those stories, of their life experience.
Now she wants to inform the science community with her first book, The Science of the Sacred. It explains how using science, which backs up traditional practice, can allow healthcare professionals to integrate age-old technologies with advances in modern medicine.
And I think we really need to understand as a medical field that, the research is clear. 20% of what makes us well is medical care. 80% of what makes us well is our social determinants and how we are in our life. So we have a lot of power to be able to make a difference in our lives and those of our community by focusing on that 80%.
Dr. Redverse hopes her book informs policymakers who weigh in on healthcare standards and practices, and also inspires Indigenous students.
Giving that sense of pride of our knowledge systems, that young people growing up in communities, when they're going out to a modern sort of Western medical education, they don't have to sacrifice scientific concepts, with the intent of being a traditionalist, or they don't have to, compromise their traditional views by becoming a scientist or going into research.
The book launch will take place in Dr. Redverse's home community of Hay River on April 27th. Charlotte Mort-Jacobs, APTN National News, Yellowknife.
Time to take a quick pause. When we come back, new money for Nunavik. How Inuit in the region stand to gain from a boost in funding that applies to thousands of everyday items. And as we go to break, here's your first weather outlook for Friday.
Hello, I'm Todd Lamoran, and here's what's coming up on Nation to Nation. The Senate has begun its study on the forced sterilization of Indigenous women to see how widespread the problem is. But at this point, what is the federal government's responsibility? Our political panel of MPs debates the issue. As well, they spar over how much the SNC-Lavalin scandal has slowed down the business of governing, as the Liberals increasingly cut debate to pass legislation, like child welfare reform and the Indigenous Languages Act, for example. The opposition says that's the government's fault, not theirs. It's all coming up after the national news.
We begin, as always, in the Atlantic. St. John's, mostly sunny, and 2. Fredericton, little bit of cloud, plus 12. Kuujjuaq, mostly sunny, -3. -3 in the Grand River as well, but cloudy. Chibougamau, lots of rain and 0 degrees. Montreal, a little bit of rain and 11. Sault Ste. Marie, 8 degrees, a little bit of precipitation. Ottawa, the same, but plus 13. Kapuskasing, 3, bit of rain. Wawa, bit of rain and 1. Churchill, a sunny 2 degrees. The Pas, a sunny 8. Dauphin, mostly sunny and 5 degrees. Gimli, snow and 4. Some kind of precipitation anyway. Saskatoon, a sunny 8 degrees. Regina, the same. Stony Rapids, sunny and 12. Meadow Lake, sunny and 8. The rest of your weather picture coming up. And welcome back. It seems Inuit in Quebec are about to benefit from a share of the province's $2.5 billion surplus to the tune of $115 million over 6 years. The money's meant to address the higher cost of living in the area, known as Nunavik, made up of 15 subarctic communities. With us now to discuss the particulars is APTN's Tom Fenario. Tom, thanks for joining us. Where will this money go, and how will that impact the everyday lives of Nunavik Inuit?
Well, the money breaks down to about $19 million a year, and the idea is to offset the cost of items up north, with specifically targeting items that will affect the Inuit lifestyle of hunting. So, for instance, items such as snowmobile oil, boots, things that you need to go out and hunt on the land, things that are essential basically to the Inuit way of life. And the idea behind that is to promote a healthy lifestyle, but also help offset the cost of groceries because there will be more country food on the table for Inuit folks up in Nunavik. The idea is also to have other items such as diapers, things that aren't covered by federal subsidies such as Nutrition North, to make them cheaper and more affordable. All told, I was told about 5,000 different items that are essential to life up in the far north will be made more affordable for Inuit up in Nunavik.
Now, Tom, as I understand it, this is actually not a new agreement, but a renewal. So what's different this time around?
Yes, well, the main difference is the most important one, more money. So the old agreement was $3 million at $33 million. This one is significantly more, almost double. People that I've spoken to seem to be quite pleased. William Taguna, who's the communications officer for the Makivik Corporation. Makivik Corporation is the body that represents the Inuit negotiations with Quebec and Canada. Anyways, Mr. Taguna says that too often people in Nunavik have to choose between buying groceries or paying the rent. And so he's pleased. He hopes that this will help change some of that.
Now, of course, underlying this is the fact that the cost of living in Nunavik is a lot higher than the rest of Quebec. By how much?
So a recent study done by the University of Laval, which is based in Quebec City, showed that the price of living in Nunavik is 30% higher than in Quebec City. So imagine for every dollar you had to pay in the south, you had to pay $1.30 up in Nunavik. So that obviously, the dollar does not go nearly as far up there. The reason for this, for our viewers who aren't familiar with the territory, is that Nunavik is located in subarctic Quebec. It stretches from the coast of Hudson's Bay all the way to the border of Labrador. I believe in square kilometers, it's almost the size of California. And there are no roads that go up there. There are 15 different communities. So there's no way to easily or at least cheaply transport food and goods. That's why we have such a huge problem. They have such a huge problem up there affording bare necessities of life. Just to give you an idea, Jennifer Munich, the president of the Kativik Regional Government, that's the body that represents, that sort of takes care of the services up there in Nunavik. She says that this program is critical to the well-being of Nunavummiut, where many don't get enough to eat. So I think that pretty much sums up how people feel up there with regards to this agreement.
All right, Tom, thank you very much for this.
Thanks for having me.
APTN's Tom Fenario. Banishment, an ancient form of justice, yet one still practiced by some First Nations. In this preview of the next APTN Investigates, reporter Trina Roach takes a look at how banishment works in practice today.
Banishment, a way some Indigenous societies dealt with crime in pre-colonial times. Exiled or left behind, it was essentially a death sentence. But increasingly, Indigenous communities today are looking at banishment mainly as a way to deal with the growing drug problem on reserves. But how does banishment work in the modern world?
How the hell do I keep them out? You know, we've got a wide area here. What are you going to do?
Exactly. Normally
put up a wall like...
No walls here, but a different set of laws govern life on reserve. Canada's Indian Act. And the Tobic Chief and Council are using it to create a bylaw on banishment.
I feel that people are, kind of getting a hint of reality and saying maybe it's time to turn my life around.
It's the only way it's going to stop people, deter them from selling drugs, so be it.
When you banish someone who is already going through the Canadian legal system, you may end up actually treating an Indigenous person twice as hard.
And you can catch that full Investigates episode tomorrow night, right after the APTN National Newscast. Time for another break. When APTN National News returns, a look back at one community in Australia that made their views known with their feet. And just before we go to the rest of your Friday weather outlook, a quick look at another story we're working on.
The RCMP arrested 3 Mi'kmaq grandmothers on the Alton gas site in Nova Scotia on Wednesday. They are protecting the Sebenagity River from the project that will dump salty brine into the river. No charges were laid, but they have been ordered to stay away from the site.
And we say here in prayer, and we're praying that our people stand up and exercise their treaty rights and sovereignty and stop them.
We fill out the rest of the Friday forecast in northern Alberta, where Fort Chip is 12 degrees with a bit of rain. Peace River, much the same, 13. Lethbridge, a sunny 8 degrees. Edmonton, mostly sunny, and 12. Kamloops, mostly sunny, and 15. Tofino, mostly sunny, and 11. Fort Nelson, bit of rain, 14 degrees. Prince Rupert, mostly cloudy, and 9. Dawson, mostly cloudy and 10 degrees. Whitehorse, some of the wet stuff, under 8 degrees skies. Norman Wells, 5 degrees, bit of rain. Wati, a bit of cloud and 8. Colville Lake, rain, -2. Tuktoyaktuk, mostly cloudy, -8. Repulse Bay, rainy and -6. Baker Lake, bit of showers, -2. Igloolik, also a bit of showers, -8. Resolute, a sunny, -24. And thanks for staying with us. This next story comes to us courtesy of our counterparts at National Indigenous Television in Australia, more specifically the state of New South Wales, where decades ago hundreds of residents of one reserve staged a dramatic walkout in defense of their rights to land and a better life. NITV's Rachel Hawking tells us the tale.
It's morning on Dungala. People have returned to the banks outside Barma, near Cumragunja, to remember what these waters witnessed 80 years ago.
Murray from the Murray. The Murray from the Murray. Murray's on Dungala. Thank you.
And I've come to visit what was once the old school, now a makeshift museum.
Yeah, well, this is what we're remembering today, the Cumragunja walk-off. And my dad was 5 or 6 years old and he went across in the boat with all the blankets and pots and pans and things, he told us. And
did he tell you what it was like for him?
Oh, he didn't talk much about it. They didn't talk much about it. That's one of the things which has been, I guess, for us not getting the whole real gist of what it is until later on now, what struggles they really did have.
What they fought for today.
And what they fought for. I have what I have because they fought for it. Yeah.
In a major act of defiance to the white authorities, the people of Cumragunja picked up their belongings, packed them into dinghies and crossed the New South Wales border into Victoria. And there were many who never left Cumragunja, an act of bravery in its own right, many fearing the potential backlash of a cruel manager.
My mum and dad walked off here in 1939 to the brutality and harsh treatment by the mission manager, E.J. McQuiggan. He was a shocking man. He had a whip and a horse and a gun. He just wielded the axe so badly and so much that when our people walked off, he tore down all the huts, all the houses, all the humpies, in spite.
The story of what happened here begins decades before the tyrannical rule of A.J. McQuiggan. Cumragunja was a self-sufficient Aboriginal reserve at the turn of the century. Men and women petitioned the New South Wales Governor for land and farmed it successfully. But that land was revoked and leased out to white farmers. And by 1915, the Aborigines Protection Board seized control of Cumragunja. Children and wages were stolen. By the time A.J. McQuiggan was instated as manager, a movement was already building.
Most of the Aboriginal movement came from here, through the Advancement League, Aboriginal Advancement League, Redfern Medical Centre, the VARS, Victorian Aboriginal Health Service. They came from the people here that were educated and wrote submissions and refused to take no for an answer. That were able to set up all the services That would eventually go nationwide, around for everybody.
The leadership of people like Auntie Marge Tucker, Jack Patton, William Cooper and Bill Ferguson saw the establishment of medical centres, petitions, the declaration of the Day of Mourning, and eventually the bold actions taken on February 4, 1939. But for many, the fight still continues today.
It's the same fight that we've always had to have land rights here. We do not have the right to manage this land in the way that we want to, and in the way that our elders who are still with us, they can pass that knowledge on to us, but that's getting further and further out of reach for many people to reconnect to land and to build here and to live here and to thrive here. So we need land rights. We need recognition. We need for all of Australia to be able to come together and say, here is what happened. Not just in bits and pieces, but here is the truth of our shared history.
We never ceded land. We never ceded that water out here. We didn't say, look, you take the river, you know, you have the land. We never said nothing about that. They took it, they stole it, you know. And now 200 years that's come to us, and we're advancing that stronger and stronger every day. We're not far away.
And so the people of Cumbragunja, Bangarang and people of the Yorta Yorta nations retrace the steps of their ancestors, walking back onto the place which for many means home.
And we conclude tonight with the big science news people are still talking about, that unprecedented image of a black hole. From science fiction to science reality, black holes have long captured the popular imagination. But what are they? How do they exist? And what do they actually look like? Well, thanks to astronomers, we now have our first glimpse. In what is touted as the first direct visual evidence that such phenomena exist, you can see here a ring of fire around a dark hole, the result of superheated gas falling into it. Located in a galaxy far, far away, sorry, couldn't resist, the celestial body measures 40 billion kilometers across. Now, for perspective, that's bigger than our entire solar system. Avery Broderick, a Canadian physicist on the research team behind the image, says black holes have such a large gravitational pull, not even light can escape.
What we are looking at is the most extreme environment in the known universe, the vicinity of a black hole. The black hole bends light, just like apples fall in Einstein's theory of gravity. Light falls and radio waves fall. It's bent around this black hole, which then imposes itself or introduces itself as this dark shadow at the center. So the light comes from this hot plasma swirling about the black hole, but the shadow is the black hole itself.
And it's time for our newscast to go dark once again. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Rick Harp. We'll do this all over again tomorrow evening, this same time on this same channel. Until then, take care, everyone. Up next, it's Nation to Nation with Todd Lamoran.